dozens of movies over more than a decade, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has inarguably long since cemented its place as an unstoppable pop culture juggernaut. Of course, no matter how popular the franchise is or how many billions of dollars it racks up in a worldwide box office revenue, some of those movies are bound to be better than others. The only question is, which one reigns supreme and which one gives you a good opportunity to go get another soda during an increasingly lengthy Marvel movie marathon. So here's a look back at every movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, ranked from worst to best. 23. Thor: The Dark World. If the problem with Age of Ultron is that there's just too much going on, Thor 2 suffers from the opposite problem. Despite a solid cast that features Chris Hemsworth being as charming as ever, and the fact that it's based on one of the greatest comic book arcs ever printed, the character-defining Walter Simonson run on Thor that introduced Malekith's curse, and a whole bunch of other stuff that will eventually make it to the big swing. The Dark World never lives up to its promise. On paper, there's a ton of cool stuff in this movie that sounds amazing. A Star Wars attack on Asgard by spaceship driven by dark elves, underlining the Asgardian as interdimensional beings with technology indistinguishable from magic. The rock monsters from Thor's very first comic book appearance getting smashed into a pile of rubber. Thor and Loki teaming up for revenge against the villain that killed their mom, climaxing in a fistfight in which Thor and Malekith are literally punching each other so hard that they land in other dimensions. Unfortunately, literally none of it is as good as it sounds, especially the part about punching somebody so hard they land in Jotunheim. Instead, there's a constant feeling of wondering if you're missing out on something, and it doesn't really go away when the characters start talking about how they are not sure how things are supposed to work either. 22. The Incredible Hulk. If you weren't there to see it all come together in real time, it's hard to accurately convey how exciting it was to see Nick Fury shows up at the end of Iron Man and hint at the idea of a full-on shared universe of superhero movies. When The Incredible Hulk hit theatres a month later, however, it didn't seem quite as exciting, even when Tony Stark dropped in after the credits to lay the groundwork for the Avengers. In all honesty, The Incredible Hulk isn't bad. It just happens to be the most forgettable movie in the entire franchise. It's the one nobody ever remembers, which is a real shame when you consider that it does so much right. For one thing, if you're going to make a movie about nerdy scientists with anger issues so powerful they could level a whole town, getting the guy who starred in Fight Club to play Bruce Banner is a pretty solid move. For another, even though it took a lot of care to distance itself from Ang Lee's Hulk, the filmmakers realized that since it came out only 5 years earlier, audiences didn't need a full-blown origin story to get up to the speed. Instead, what we get a revised origin tied into Captain America and the Super Soldier program, which served as a first stumbling step towards building the full-on shared universe that this movie would eventually inhabit. Unfortunately, it just didn't quite land. After 2 movies in as many months, it would be 2 more years before the MCU would get another film and 4 years before the Hulk would return, with Mark Ruffalo taking over the role from Ed Norton. 21. Iron Man 2. He's not the world beater that Ultron or the Red Skull are. He's not a tragic figure who almost has you on his side that you get with Loki. And he's not the cold, hateful destroyer that Helmut Zemo is. But Justin Hammer is a really great MCU villain. Just the image of Sam Rockwell literally dancing across the stage to present his army of Iron Man 2 drones is endlessly delightful. Of course, there's a lot in Iron Man 2 that doesn't involve Sam Rockwell busting a move. A scene that helps to cement him as a more amoral version of Tony Stark, who never had Stark's life-changing experience. And that's where it fails to measure up to his predecessor. The inclusion of Whiplash as another evil Tony keeps threatening to steer the story in an unnecessarily complicated direction. And the scene when Stark goes down into his basement with a particle accelerator to somehow build a new element is so goofy that it crosses the line from comic book super science into a pure Deus Ex Machina territory. The fact that it only ever referred to as a new element, including Jarvis' flat congratulation to Tony for adding to the periodic table, doesn't really help it seems less ridiculous. At the same time, if Incredible Hulk was a stumble, Iron Man 2 was a confident strike towards the MCU, introducing the Black Widow and War Machine into the mix. setting up the adversarial relationship between the government and the heroes that will play a huge role in the Avengers, Winter Soldier, and Civil War, and teasing Thor's arrival in the next film. There's a lot there to like, and even if it's outweighed by the bad stuff, we'll always have Justin Hammer's dance move. Number 20. Thor. Iron Man 2 might have been the first big step towards fleshing out the Marvel Universe, but Thor was the first time we actually got to see his scope in action. It's a pretty bold move when you consider that the previous 3 MCU movies had been set pretty firmly on Earth. With Thor, however, we got Asgard in all its glory, complete with a Bifrost made with rainbow laser, epic battles against the Frost Giant of Jotunheim, and perhaps more importantly, those big old Jack Kirby hats that Norse gods apparently love to wear. The trick, of course, is that the movie ended up dragging all that stuff to Earth, leading to the climatic battle against the Destroyer, a Viking god robot with a face made of death lasers, that definitely served to emphasize Thor's humanity and make Chris Hemsworth a little easier for us more mortals to relate to, which in turn led directly to Loki showing up in the Avengers and turning that movie into a story more about Thor and his brother than anything else. At the same time, this is a movie that never shied away from giving us interdimensional high fantasy either, and that's what makes it work. Number 19. Iron Man 3. Here's the thing about Iron Man 3. It rules. It's probably the single most underrated entry in the entire MCU, but it's a perfect example of what makes these movies work so well. It draws from the comics with the broad strokes of the plot lifted from Warren Ellis and Eddie Granoff's Extremis, but blends that story with a film that focuses on developing Tony Stark as a character, thanks largely to the work put in by the director, writer Shane Black. It's a movie that's full of Black directorial trademarks. If you didn't know, this was the same guy who brought you Little Weapons, the fast patter conversation with a snarky twin, and the fact that it's set entirely at Christmas should be a dead giveaway. But his style works perfectly for using the superhero threat as a backdrop for exploring the idea of Tony dealing with the consequences of his own action in a changing world. And that's the best thing about it. At this point, we weren't just 3 movies into Iron Man saga. We were 7 films deep in the cinematic universe, dealing with grand scale threats it had never seen before. Black and Downey explore how the smartest guy in the room deals with living in a world that becoming something he can't predict. It's a movie about a superhero with an anxiety disorder, and not only does that feel refreshing and interesting, it's a permanent consequence that leads directly to Age of Ultron and Civil War. Plus, not to spoil it for anyone who skipped out the first time around, the twist with the Mandarin is brilliant. Number 18. Doctor Strange. For long-time comic readers, the fact that a big budget Doctor Strange movie was actually going to happen came as something of a surprise. There was a big question of just how the mind-bending, psychedelic sorcerer of the mystical side of the Marvel Universe, something that only had really been hinted at with the mixture of high fantasy and sci-fi in Thor, was going to fit into the movies. The good news is that from a visual standpoint, they absolutely did it. The splitting fractal realities in the movie fight scenes were beautifully weird, and the ghostly ethereal plane were life and death battles. For the fate of Earth could rage unseen alongside day-to-day reality was great for showing how different Stephen Strange's world was from the other Marvel superheroes. The bad news is that from a storytelling standpoint, well, they basically just did Iron Man with a magic instead of technology. The beats of Doctor Strange's journey from self-absorbed surgeon to sorcerer supreme felt familiar to the point of distraction, with even Benedict Cumberbatch's jokey patter about Beyonce feeling like something Robert Downey Jr. could say about writing a single syllable. It's not until the climax and strange time-bending bargain with Dormammu that Doctor Strange really comes into his own and does something in a way that could only work for his title character. That part's great, but the road that gets us there is one we've been down before. Number 17. Avengers Age of Ultron. We'll get to this in a little more detail when it comes to time to talk about the first Avengers movie, but one of the biggest hurdles to get through when you're putting these many superheroes into a single movie after 2 or 3 features on their own is that it tends to flatten out their characters quite a bit. There's just not enough room to have everything going on at once, and all the character development they get in their solo movie tends to be pretty broad when they're all competing for the spotlight. That's not necessarily a deal breaker. Civil War actually did a great job of it with even more character by giving everyone a single shining moment, But in Age of Ultron, consistency and depth get thrown out. Captain America's a prude, Thor's a meathead, and while Iron Man gets away better than the others from a character standpoint. The lessons Tony Stark seemed to learn in Iron Man 3 seems completely forgotten here. Oh, and also he's responsible for creating a murder robot, so there's going to be a problem. On top of that, most of the characters note that are here, like Black Widow laminating that he's a monster, Hawkeye having a secret family just to set a 2 days away from retirement character Swerve, and where the heck did that Black Widow romance come from? Just feel awkward. Despite a pretty great final battle full of some really fun action sequence, Age of Ultron ultimately feels unbalanced. Number 16. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. If the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie proved that the MCU could get weird and cosmic and still be incredibly entertaining, the second one proved that that wasn't a fluke. If anything, it went more cosmic. The first movie brought us stuff like the Nova Corps and Ronan the Accuser as adversaries for the heroes, with Nova Corps and an appearance by planet-destroying Celestials serving as the background for a space-faring Avenger. The second movie though, that thing has about a half hour of superhero banging out in the core of Ego, the living planet, which is actually a great giant purple planet with big old Kurt Russell's face on it. And that's honestly just the tip of the iceberg of the wild sci-fi this movie gets up to. It's got waves of space drones swarming into starship battles, a warp drive sequence that knows exactly how silly it is, and it features the best Stanley cameo in cinema history, and the single best use of a Zune in anything ever. The only thing that keeps it from surpassing the first movie is that the soundtrack is not quite as good, even if the chain still rocks pretty hard. Number 15. Ant-Man. It's tempting to say Ant-Man should have worked as well as it did, and that a second-tier superhero with the ability to get really tiny and talk to ants was a big surprise when he became the next entry in a superhero franchise that was raking in billions. Really though, it's not that unexpected, especially considering that Marvel's first big movie success came from Blade, a pretty obscure D-lister from the pages of Tomb of Dracula. Of course, the adventures of Paul Rudd's tiny crime fighter couldn't be more different from Wesley Snipes scowling about ice skating uphill and declaring war on suckheads. But the point stands. Audiences have always been interested in story that twist the expected superhero plot points around to something new, and that's where Ant-Man really delivers. As easy as it would be to portray Scott Lang as a microscopic version of Ant-Man, whose hero's journey followed the same beats, his story felt different, and the ties to the larger MCU worked really well. There are a few missteps here for sure. The movie goes out of its way to justify not having the Wasp show up until the sequel in a way that's actually pretty frustrating. But on the other hand, this is a movie in which the hero loses a fight with a toy train and Chekhov's gun is actually a Chekhov's 60-ton Soviet tank. Number 14. The Avengers. That the Avengers work at all is pretty impressive, but that it works as well as it did, that's basically a miracle. Even less than a decade later, it's something difficult to remember that this was the first time that anything like this had been attempted at this scale. A superhero team movie that combined heroes who while they might have been planned for a shared universe, had all been established in their own films, each with their own tone and style. In bringing them together, Joss Whedon had to juggle the fantasy of Thor, the snarky sci-fi of Iron Man, and the sincere superheroics of Captain America, combining them all along with Hawkeye and Black Widow, with stakes that were high enough to bring everyone together for a single adventure, and this movie does it. It's far from flawless though. Those big stakes mostly result from an army of faceless aliens. It's still pretty weird that the Avengers needed Phil Coulson to die before they decided to go be a super team. And the character development suffers. There may not be a single line in the entire MCU that lines quite as badly as Captain America smuggling his way through "There's only one God, ma'am." That said, there may not be a more fun moment in the entire MCU than Loki getting Hulk smashed like a Looney Tunes character. Number 13. Iron Man. It's safe to say Iron Man surprised us all. It's not that we expected it to be bad. Tony Stark's origin story is pretty easy to restructure into the beats of a Hollywood action movie. He had a great cast that includes Jeff Bridges as the villain of one of the best Iron Man stories ever. And while director Jon Favreau might be best known for Elf, that wasn't really a bad thing. But still, none of us expected it to be so good that it would stand up as the foundation on which every other piece of cinematic universe would be built. There are times when this feels less like a superhero movie and more like a popcorn revenge flick where the hero just happens to have a flying suit of armor. But it did its job so well that those shortcomings are easy to forgive. Robert Downey Jr. didn't just fit the role of Tony Stark. His portrayal revitalized the character across all media, including doubling back into the comics and making him a household name in the Marvel Universe in a way he hadn't been in years. Number 12. Ant-Man and the Wasp. There's a lot of great stuff about Ant-Man and the Wasp. Every set piece plays with the idea of changing size in a different way, from the wasp running around the blade of a knife that was hurled at her in the kitchen to a portable office building to Ant-Man using a flatbed truck as a razor scooter. That actually leads to the second great thing about it. It's genuinely hilarious. That might not be surprising given that the movie was trending that way already. But after the relentless downer ending of Avengers Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp light-hearted take on superheroes with stakes that were far more personal than cosmic was a welcome shift in tone. And that's actually the best thing about it. It's easy to argue that the best thing about the MCU is that it feels like a universe in the same way that the comics do, full of moving parts that intertwine and build off each other even when they are not directly interacting. The knowledge that Ant-Man and the Wasp and Infinity War happened roughly at the same time is maybe the best expression of that. And knowing that Thanos is out there trying to murder the universe while Scotland is running through an elementary school in an oversized hoodie because he got stuck at 3 feet tall shows just how much potential there is in the whole thing. Plus, it sets a heck of a gut punch at the end. Number 11. Captain America, the First Avenger. Audiences love them, but origin stories are always a little tricky to pull off. At the very least, we all know how it's gonna end. And the temptation to just skip all the training montages and figuring out your power scenes and get to do the part where the hero's punching out supervillain is pretty strong. The First Avenger, however, does it better. A lot of that has to do with Chris Evans. In a franchise that's full of amazing casting choices, Evans pulled off the incredible feat of embodying a square-jawed, insanely relentless, earnest product of the military-industrial complex in a way that makes him impossible to not to like and respect. For all the super strength that lets him bicep curl a helicopter and throws a metal frisbee through a brick wall, that's a character whose real superpowers is making you believe in him. With scenes like a pre-cap Steve Rogers pulling himself back to his feet and saying, "I can do this all day" to a couple of bullies. A moment that has a great callback a few years later in Civil War. That's exactly what this movie does. As good as it was on its own, it also served as the proof of concept for the superhero movie as a period piece. Not only did that give the MCU a history that goes back further than 2008 and Tony Stark's cave, it paved the way for other projects that will flesh out that history in really fun ways. Number 10. Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie isn't just entertaining. It manages to balance so much stuff going on that you almost don't notice how complicated it is for all the fun you're having. There's a team of lovable misfits coming together and dealing with their own issues while fighting against a massive threat. A glimpse at the cosmic scope of the MCU that includes Celestials, the Nova Corps, an expansive interstellar empires, and a retro feel supported by a classic rock soundtrack that doesn't feel like it's wallowing in the past. There's a tough bunch of plates to keep spinning, while still telling a story that's fun and adventurous enough to make Rocket Raccoon a household name. It breaks the formula in every way it can to the point where it's a superhero team movie that ends with a dance-off and the heroes literally saving the world with the power of friendship. That's awesome. Number 9. Spiderman Far From Home. Following up to an epic spectacle like Avengers Endgame, with a movie that at least 30% high school road trip rom-com is, to say the least, a pretty bold choice for the MCU. At the end of the day though, Far From Home is the perfect epilogue to the Infinity Saga that made up the first 23 films in the MCU. For one thing, it's a movie that directly built around the question of what this universe looks like without Tony Stark, the hero who kicked the whole thing off back in 2008. Not to mention the other heroes who rode off into the sunset at the end of Endgame. There's an idea that there's a void in the MCU that needs to be filled, and as Spider-Man, the character who sold Marvel comics that he used to be on their letterheads and paychecks, might just be the one to do it. That's why Mysterio's plot, which is both widely complicated and comic booky as hell, in a good way, goes all the way back to the first Iron Man film and weaves through the events of the MCU. Making it all make sense through these callbacks was a pretty impressive feat to begin with, but tying them all together to mark the end of the era, well, that's amazing. Beyond all that though, it's got everything you want from a Spider-Man story. Peter Parker has to wrestle with an impossible responsibility and the heavy self-doubt that comes along with it. The romance with MJ is both heartfelt and sweet. And finally, at long last, we got some consequences for Spider-Man always walking around with his mask off in this movie. Throw in the world-shaking surprises of the mid-credit sequence and the genius of making a massive special effects blockbuster with an evil special effects guy as your villain. And you've got a super fun time at the movie theaters. Number 8. Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel arrived in theaters under the burden of some pretty heavy expectations. It was, after all, the first Marvel movie to focus on a female superhero. Something that fans have been waiting for since at least Iron Man 2's introduction of Black Widow. For any installment of the MCU, the audience knows they are going to get a larger piece of an ongoing puzzle, but in this one, we also knew that we were being introduced to a character who could have a huge impact on what was shaping up to be the biggest superhero movie of all time. That's a lot for a single film to carry, but Captain Marvel didn't struggle under it soared. Rather than falling into the tried and true Iron Man formula that had been used to introduce characters like Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, Captain Marvel positioned itself as a search for identity and built its theme around the idea of what it truly means to live up to your potential. Naturally, it did this through the metaphor of an intergalactic war, and that potential was mostly represented by the main character, glowing the literal cosmic fire while she punched her way through spaceships. So that's pretty rad. The worst thing you can say about Captain Marvel is that it's a little heavy-handed and sometimes dips a toe into being outright corny. The flip side to that though is that corny really just means honest and unabashedly fun. And between cosmic battles and jokes about blockbuster video, this one more than live up to the hype. Number 7. Captain America the Winter Soldier. If the first Avenger introduced us to what makes Captain America great, Winter Soldier delivers on that promise. Everything about this movie reinforces the idea that he's exactly the guy you want to have the power to save the world. The notebook full of pop culture reference that he needs to look up to, understand the world around him. The friendship with Sam Wilson that starts with bonding over their wartime experiences. The loyalty to his friend that leads him to risk his own life to save Bucky. The resignation of giving his opponent one last chance to back out before he beats up an elevator full of traitors tasked with taking him out. Those are all great set pieces, but they add up to a whole that's incredible. Even before you get to how much of the movie is based around Steve Rogers just kicking the living hell out of bad guys, that stuff's pretty fun too. Number 6. Captain America Civil War. Even though Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes are unquestionably the focus of the movie, there's a pretty convincing argument to be made that this movie should be called Avengers Civil War instead. It does after all have everyone in it, and they aren't just cameos either. This is the movie that brought in Ant-Man, put on the tip of Hawkeye's arrow and blew it up to a giant size in the middle of a superhero Royal Rumble. Scarlet Witch made a huge impact and saw a character develop as much as it did in the Age of Ultron. War Machine got taken down and the Avengers was split by the machinations of a villain who just wanted to divide them and got exactly what he wanted in the end. And if that wasn't enough, it's also the movie that introduces movie audience to Black Panther and Spiderman. But where it really succeeds is in not flattening out the characters to make more room for a huge cast. Everyone gets a spotlight moment that works, leaving room for the conflict triangle of the main characters to expand to the point where it destroys the team. Number 5. Black Panther. Black Panther introduction in Captain America Civil War was the biggest highlight in a movie full of great moments. It was so great, in fact, that it put a ton of pressure on T'Challa's first solo outing. Expectations were high, and director Ryan Coogler and star Chadwick Boseman managed to not only live up to them, but exceed them by delivering what is unquestionably one of the greatest superhero films of all time. Maybe it's because Boseman's T'Challa is a character struggling with the weight of expectations himself, under the pressure of having to live up to the idea of his father, leading a nation of fantastic sci-fi technology in a world where cities fall from skies and bright green anger monsters rampage through the streets. Like Boseman, the Black Panther is more than up for a challenge, but the journey he takes to get there is full of incredibly compelling complications. The reveal that his father wasn't as honest as he thought, and the channel of a villain with justifiable anger at the world around him, creates the kind of moral challenge that makes for a superhero struggle that goes far beyond just the punch-out battle in the climax. In terms of changing the geopolitical landscape, Black Panther arguably has more power than any other hero we've seen. And while other heroes might have to learn the lesson of the great responsibility that comes with it, T'Challa already knows that. His question is what forms that responsibility need to take. In general, the Marvel movies are at their best when they embrace the wild cosmic action that comes from life in a universe where the Infinity Stones can warp reality and where cosmic beings hold gladiatorial games. Black Panther never shies away from its high-tech comic book roots, but tells a story that's very much rooted in the real world and does it beautifully. Number 4. Avengers Infinity War. If Avengers was the movie that proved you could pull together disparate characters who had been established in their own films and unify them into a single believable team in the face of an evil that threatened the entire world, Infinity War is the movie that takes that idea to a whole new level. These movies brought together the entire universe, juggling a massive roster of characters and pitting them against a villain that threatened the entire universe. More than anything else, it captured the feel of a comic book crossover, complete with all the twists, turn and tie-in issues that superhero fans have come to expect. There are multiple stories going on at the same time, each with their own flavour and feeling, but all of which are interconnected on every level. They build and bridge between each other, spotlighting individual heroes and story arcs and making sure every single character, from Gamora to Spiderman to Doctor Strange to Black Panther, all have their big signature moment. And when it comes together at the end, it's with a fight across multiple planets where the unbelievably high stakes become very real for both the characters and for fans who have been invested in these movies for a full 10 years at this point. That's a tough enough bit of storytelling to pull off well in comic books, and they've had practice that goes back to at least 1985 and Secret Wars. Seeing it done here in a huge movie that still has that feeling of a story that starts in an issue of Doctor Strange leading to an issue of Thor until it all comes together. No other movie has ever done that, and it's hard to imagine another one doing it this well. Number 3. Thor Ragnarok. The Marvel movies are at their best when they use the comics for inspiration without attempting to recreate exactly what happens on the page in live action. Of course, it doesn't hurt to have some great source material to draw from, and that's where Ragnarok really shines. To say that it leaves heavily from Walt Simonson's epic mid-80s run on the mighty Thor is putting it mildly. The only thing in this movie that weren't directly inspired by Simonson are the pieces it pulls directly from Greg Pak and Carlo Pagliani's Planet Hulk storyline. Right down to the Hulk's gladiator gear. The thing is, Taika Waititi's film chops up all these pieces and rearranges them into something different, rather than just retelling a familiar story. It captures the feel of that comic, the interplanetary scope, the mix of sci-fi and high fantasy mythology. The massive stakes is all here, and as far as a Marvel movies going cosmic, it's never been done better. And it's also genuinely hilarious. That part isn't surprising, considering that before Ragnarok, Waititi was probably best known for directing the vampire mockumentary What We Do in the Shadows. But it takes advantage of Chris Hemsworth's infuriating good comedic timing and does an amazing job revealing characters. Plus, having Doctor Strange be immediately prepared to deal with Loki as a weird magical threat to the planet is probably a better moment for him than anything that actually happened in his own dang movie. Number 2. Spider-Man Homecoming. Homecoming is the best thing the MCU has brought us, partly because it's a movie that couldn't exist without the rest of the universe around it. As good as it is on its own, the fact that Peter Parker swings to action after 15 other movies means you don't have to waste time with an origin story. And thematically, the movie builds on everything that came before in a truly incredible way. There are direct callbacks to Tony Stark's character arc that shows how different Peter is from the heroes he's trying to impress. There's a good reason that the climatic fight involved the villain trying to steal a crate load of arc reactors, and the idea of superhero universe erupting around otherwise normal people is in the conflict that drives everything about the movie. Take that away and you've still got great characters, great action, and one of the best scenes in the franchise. With it though, you've got pure magic. Number 1. Avengers Endgame. Endgame might actually be the easiest movie in the entire franchise to screw up. Not only does it follow up on the incredible downer ending of Infinity War, it's also meant to serve as the climax of the 22 movies that make up the first saga of the MCU. Just by sheer number of moving parts and scattered plot threads to tie up gave the cast and filmmakers countless opportunities to stumble right off the delicate balance of action, comedy, and heartbreaking moments. With that in mind, saying that they pull it off isn't just saying they made a good movie. Although Endgame certainly is that, it's saying that they pretty much pulled off a miracle. The film is loaded with callbacks to virtually every installment of the MCU to date, in ways that you don't even realize until you stop to think about them. Captain America starting a support group because that's what Sam Wilson was doing when they met in Winter Soldier. Thor founding a new Asgard in exactly the spot where Odin told him this could be Asgard in Ragnarok. Black Widow's obliterating the rate in my ledger that she talked about back in Avengers by saving everyone. It's payoff after payoff, but it never feels like a pure fan service, and that alone is a monumental achievement. It really does feel like an ending. But apart from that, Endgame still has enough great moments on its own to fill its 3-hour runtime in a way that feels a lot shorter. The time travel, the debut of a new kind of Hulk, the audacity of skipping ahead 5 years to a world where the good guys lost, and the sheer fist-pumping awesomeness of Cap tightening up his shield and standing alone against the apocalypse are going to stay with moviegoers forever. It really is the thundering climax of everything fans have wanted since Nick Fury first walked into the frame back in Iron Man.